Hello, and welcome to PowerSpeaking Live. Thank you so much for joining us today for this critically important and timely topic. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, the host of this monthly series and the CEO of PowerSpeaking Incorporated. And you can find today's episode after the conclusion of this event, as well as all past episodes on the PowerSpeaking podcast, which our producer will drop a link to in chat. Today's conversation is going to be focused on leadership communication. Axios HQ recently published a very robust study on the current state of workplace communication. Any guesses on what their key finding was? Just think about that based on your experience in today's workplace environment. Their number one takeaway is that there is a lot going wrong with workplace communication today, and leaders need to fix it. The fact of the matter is, nearly every leader in every organization spends an inordinate amount of time communicating. However, very few are taught to do it effectively, efficiently, and profitably. And as you know, the implications of doing it ineffectively leads to a whole host of issues, such as misalignment, misunderstandings, hurt feelings, inefficiencies, low engagement, and so much more. According to one study, the cost of ineffective communication within an organization mounts up to over $15,000 per employee per year. So there's a strong case to be made to figure out what is causing these issues, and most importantly, how can we as leaders and those in the space of helping leaders address this issue. So that's our focus today. And we have the benefit of tapping into three incredible experts who come at this topic from different perspectives. So that's one of the things I think is particularly exciting about today's panel. First up, we have Mano Chima. Mano is the former head of architecture for AstraZeneca. And Mano, I know that you're going to be coming at this topic drawing from a wealth of experience you have in leading, inspiring, and enlightening very large, globally diverse teams. And, you know, based on our conversations, I know you agree that one of the keys to this success that you've had is your ability to thoughtfully communicate and constantly tailor that communication to the situation and the particular audience.
Yes, absolutely true. And with a global organization of 126 countries plus, there's a vast variety of cultures and ways of working that one has to align with.
Yeah, absolutely. So look forward to getting into that and more. Also with us, we have Mary Oleski. Mary is the Associate Director of Strategy and Curricular Support for Stanford's Graduate School of Business, merely one of the number one MBA programs in the world. So Mary, I'm really eager to get your perspective based on just all that you've learned in helping to groom our next generation of leaders. And I know you're also going to be able to tap into insights you've gained through your experience working as both a life and leadership coach.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I am so happy to be here and looking forward to learning from everyone in the room.
Absolutely. And thanks for bringing that up, Mary. On that note, I know we have a lot of really experienced participants in our audience. So at any point in the conversation, if you have some advice you'd like to share or questions you'd like to pose to our panelists, please do so. The more interactive, the more we'll all get out of the experience. Lastly, I'd like to introduce Dan Albom. Dan is the marketing leader for Market Impact And Dan, you're not only going to be drawing on your vast marketing expertise, but also all of the insights that you gleaned through the countless interviews that you did with global high impact leaders for your book that I think was fairly recently published, The Impact Makers.
That's right. That's right. I'm really excited, Carrie, for the opportunity to share in this conversation today. And as leaders, this is a learning journey, and being part of that, really looking forward to it.
Awesome. That's awesome. And I know you also are benefiting for just constant real-time insights through your podcast, Market Maker Insights. So you're regularly talking to experts in this space and can tap into that experience. So needless to say, we've got some rich expertise at our disposal. So let's get into it. I made a pretty bold statement at the outset based on Axios findings that there's a lot going wrong in workplace communication today. And one of the drivers for that is because the expectations of employees, stakeholders, and customers have shifted pretty significantly. And some leaders haven't kept up. For example, one of the findings from the study I referenced earlier pointed to a pretty significant disconnect between leaders' perceptions and employees' perceptions of workplace communication. So, for instance, 77% of the leaders surveyed felt that the communication within their workplace was helpful and relevant, while only 46% of the employees agreed. And 78% of those same leaders felt that the communication was clear and engaging. Only 51% of the employees agreed. What's going on here, Dan? Can you talk a little bit about how expectations have shifted in, say, the last 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, this is a really important issue, Carrie, and I think we have to take a step back and look at some other numbers that really tell a compelling story. So obviously great disruption through the pandemic, and as the media has termed it, the great resignation, when we look at just the numbers of workers in 2021 and 2022 that intentionally were leaving their jobs, the number about 50 million in 2022. And even though those numbers have subsided and we feel like we've turned a corner in terms of that dynamic, now we have to explore back to this disconnect issue. And at the core of that, in my book, I talk about a foundational principle for effective leadership, which is the triad, which includes things like empowerment and accountability. But the third aspect of that is transparency. And what's really under transparency is really a path to engagement. And what's very concerning right now is that clearly we have a lot of room to improve engagement in organizations. Employees, recent Gallup poll, 59% said that they were in a state of quiet quitting. Well, what does that mean? That means I haven't physically left my organization, but I don't feel engaged. Another 18% said they were loud quitting, so I'm going to be vocal about it. And at the heart of engagement is the connection between leaders and their teams and peers, and that all involves bilateral communication, bidirectional communication, right? So this isn't just about one-way directive. This is around creating dialogue. It's about asking questions. It's about showing interest. It's about having others' backs. And that really ties back to more setting your ego aside as a leader and adopting a servant leader mindset that is really around connection, removing barriers, and literally lifting your teams up to higher levels of performance.
Well said. Well said. There's a lot there. A lot there. Mono, what do you have to add?
Yes, and all those things are true. And one just has to give it a bit of color by saying that if the world is a big place and there are an awful lot of cultures and countries where there is more of a command and control style of management still in place. So in a mixed audience, say a global town hall or a set of meetings sending the same message across the world, one has to look at how it's received through the recipient's eyes and deliver to that image. So there are cultures where a directive-led communication may still be prevalent, and maybe what we need to do is also try and bring those types of groups along to that more bi-directional, more modern way of leadership and communication.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent point. And later on, I want to get more into that, Mano, because I think one of the things that's incredibly nuanced and pretty complex is, as a leader who's responsible for connecting with and engaging a very diverse, culturally diverse team, how do you do that effectively when you're in a large group setting? So we'll get into that in more detail. Dan, do you think it's fair to say, in general, that employees are less tolerant today of leaders who are ineffective communicators?
Oh, absolutely. And, back to just the behavior that we're seeing in terms of, and the patience level is entirely different. Back when I started my corporate career in the 80s, there was more of this widespread mindset. If you were coming out of grad school, you were starting your career, there was this sense of unqualified gratitude and indebtedness to the corporation, because that was going to provide you this long-term, maybe more stable, more predictable career path and growth. Today, it's turned totally upside down. The expectations of the new generation of the workforce is one around new experiences, faster pace, diversity of experience, the whole notion of job hopping, what used to be kind of a taboo in terms of what do you mean? You jumped companies in 18 months and you went on, different job. Why didn't you stay there 3-5 years? The whole time dimension, time continuum expectation has totally changed, where now it's valuable. People crave the idea of stimulus, new experiences, that more of a global perspective, more of a diverse and equitable and inclusive environment. So the bar has really been raised, not only in terms of the leadership behaviors, the level of connectiveness and empowerment and engagement, but also even up to the corporate level, where we're seeing expectations about social responsibility that 20 or 30 years ago never would have been this overriding criteria, right? Or blocker in terms of being able to attract new talent. So we've seen a total transformation, Carrie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mary, I just see you nodding your head. And I know, given your experience, you work with a lot of emerging younger leaders. Would you agree with the statement?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that our younger generations coming into the workforce are seeking also, they want inspiring leaders who are going to create a vision that they can feel aligned with. And so in that, leaders also need to be prepared to speak to things that are happening in the world that is constantly evolving. And really, since the summer of 2020, I think there is a bigger expectation that leaders have a point of view, that they are able to listen, and that they are able to synthesize what they are hearing and helping their teams make meaning of that, so that they can still be productive in hitting goals and targets, but also building community.
Yeah, absolutely. And that touches on the point you were making, Dan, about it being bilateral. And a theme we're seeing throughout is, at the heart of all of this is one's ability to genuinely connect at multiple levels. And to do that, you have to be coming at your communication from a very authentic and transparent way. So let's talk more about transparency. Dan, that was something that you mentioned. And at least in my experience, and that we have in the many, many leaders from multiple parts of the world through our workshops and coaching, is this doesn't come naturally to some leaders, this this form of much more open, transparent communication. So Mano, can you talk a little bit about what advice you have to offer, especially for those leaders who find this somewhat difficult?
I think certainly for me, the most effective tactic in appearing approachable, transparent, and trust someone that my managers could trust is a regular cadence of contact. That really and in this day and age where we can't travel a lot, at least virtual contact is the best we can do. Now, if you're dealing with 120 plus countries, and in the old days we used to physically visit them, and that was perfectly fine to do. But we're in a different world now, post pandemic. But I would still say that if you have the typical span of control of a modern, large global organization of about 10 people, then you should try to at least speak to them for half an hour every couple of weeks, which is what I used to do, and that talks to the vulnerability and transparency issues that we're going to cover in a minute. But mostly, I would say appear natural, speak in a language that you feel would be appropriate to your audience. In my case, you might at one minute be talking to a senior director level enterprise architect in America, and at another time to a developer in a developing country. Yeah. So those two people are going to see strategy, objectives, and targets in very different ways, and therefore tailor the way you approach them to that recipient's viewpoint.
Excellent. Another point I'd love to make that I think super important to acknowledge is that given the level of leadership that we're at, there are naturally some things we simply cannot share. For confidentiality purposes, if we're a publicly traded company, there's certain things that you simply cannot communicate. So I found it best, especially in instances in which there's a lot of change and churn going on. Maybe there's layering of layoffs. So there's a lot of unease within the organization and insecurity. And in those times, I think it's extra important as the leader to acknowledge, I know this is an uneasy time. And I know that a lot of you are feeling some concern about your job security. I cannot share everything with you, but know that I will share everything I can as soon as I possibly can with complete honesty, and not to sugarcoat bad news, and to say it like it is. And I also think the importance of avoiding a lot of corporate speak and corporate jargon relates to transparency, because if you're talking in code, it kind of suggests you're not giving the real deal and sharing it like it is. Yeah. So somewhat related to that, and it looks like we have some questions coming in. Oh, this is just substantiating the point that you made, Dan, earlier about one of the reasons why employees are less tolerant of ineffective communicators. The average time at companies is 4.5 years now. If leaders don't communicate, folks walk away. Well, Jean, that is saying it like it is. David Binder, is the biggest issue frequency of communication between leaders and employees, or that there are specific things / topics employees want to hear about from their leaders that they are not hearing? What are your reactions to that question?
Just one point I'd like to make there is that most modern organizations have, at the highest level, at board level, at C-level, a set of strategy and objectives laid out at the beginning of every year, usually. And and that really uses very high level language and very broad terms.
Mhm.
It's then reinterpreted into more applicable objectives and targets by managers lower down the chain.
Mhm.
The difficulty is remaining loyal to those high level objectives, which are usually communicated better to higher level managers in a way that the general employee can understand and relate to. And that usually is an issue when very senior leaders talk to those employees, but still use the terms that they use when managing up.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that doesn't work well.
Such a great point. And that is a real art, that process of ensuring that the message, the objectives, whatever the initiative, whatever it is effectively cascaded throughout the organization, because at each level you've got to make it relevant. You've got to be able to speak to the so what and provide the level of context depending on the individual, the role, the part of the organization that they're in. And that takes skill and practice. And I would say, to David's question, I truly think it's a combination of frequency. We all know information overload is a real thing. It's a real valid issue. So repetition and consistency is important, and translating that in a way that makes sense. And also the what that you're talking about. You want to make sure that it's audience centric. I want to get to another point that we touched on. It relates to transparency, and it's this concept of authenticity, which almost is overused today, but so critically important. Let's talk about that. What does it really mean to be an authentic communicator? And Mary, let's kick off with you.
Yeah, this is something we think about a lot at the business school. And it's this idea of, first of all, we are human beings, not human doings. So as a leader, what are the values that I'm aligned with? What is the experience I'm trying to deliver to my team? What's the invitation I'm extending? Or what is it that I want people to say yes to? And so in all of that, seeing where can I be a little more relational with folks so that they want to follow me, that there is trust there, that there is this back and forth of communication, there's some flow and some trust. And sometimes that might require a leader to be a little bit vulnerable. But when I say vulnerability, I'm not talking about I'm going to be vulnerable and just put it all out there on the table for you, right? There's a time and place for all of those. But really thinking about, where can I lean in a little more to my values as a leader, as a way of creating safety and connection with my team or with a larger group of people to get them to that final goal or outcome. And so in order to do this, I encourage all of our leaders on the call today to think about, first, are you clear on what matters to you? What are your centering or grounding values? And then how can you let those show up more in your communication style so that you have the impact and the connection that you want to have?
Wonderfully said, Mary. So first and foremost, it takes some real reflection and introspection to make sure you're really, really clear on your own leadership values. And then what's your unique style and how do you authentically communicate those? And there's a time and place for vulnerability. I'd love to hear from you, Dan. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is something I'm really passionate about, because I've actually seen real time the impact of not really being in touch with some of the real reaction, feeling, perception that happens when there's that sense of scripted, non-authentic. And I think there's a couple of considerations here. One is, there's a traditional school of leadership kind of going back that talked about leadership equates to increased competence. And that can lead us into this trap, this mindset trap of perfectionism as a leader, which is, I don't make mistakes as a leader. I coach others through their mistakes. But what I've certainly learned in leading my own teams, and what these exceptional leaders through my Market Impact Insights podcast have shared, and this is kind of cross-culturally around the world, is that actually being that leading example of learning from your own mistakes, when your team sees that the leader themselves, they can relate, they've tripped up, they've had an objective that they didn't reach. But the important thing is to keep the focus on the outcomes and solutions that you are working towards, not to get mired in the muck of problem definition, problem regurgitation. And so as a leader, how do you get those wheels out of the mud and get the team still moving towards a really positive outcome, but also recognizing that there is valuable learning that comes from, quote, failing or not reaching an objective or mistakes, whatever that might be. But owning it, though, and showing that you own it as a leader, that's a powerful thing. And one other point that I would make around this whole idea of transparency and even bringing into the vulnerability, we put a lot of focus, as we should, on our existing internal teams, but actually taking kind of a marketing concept of the customer journey. What we don't always do is overlay that into the employee journey, all right? And so that actually starts, the tone actually is set before someone joins your organization. So even during the recruiting process, if you're bringing new talent in, how you as a leader can demonstrate transparency, vulnerability, authenticity, now you're setting a stronger foundation when you're bringing that top talent into your organization from the beginning. You're not just reacting to a problem, you're trying to create a better environment from the outset of your relationship with a potential employee. So that's important for our audience to be thinking about also.
Excellent point. Excellent. And I want to go back to the point you made about so many issues associated with this feeling that leadership means perfection, and I have to project myself as infallible and under no circumstances reveal my own failures and mistakes. What you're doing is completely stifling experimentation and innovation and creation. You want to own up to your own mistakes and encourage others to be free to do some experimentation. Mano, what do you have
so
to
I think we should touch on, and Mary may have something to add to this, on what we mean by vulnerability. You demonstrated a form of vulnerability, which is owning up to being open about mistakes, etc. I think there's a chronology to this. That version of vulnerability works very well when you have a relationship where you have shown yourself to be a good leader, a calm leader, someone who's good in a crisis. And then when you own up to your mistakes, it can have a very enhancing effect on those virtues. But appearing vulnerable straight away in your career and certainly to multiple levels of the organization may have the opposite of the intended effect. Mary had a great definition of vulnerability, which works in a different way and well as well.
Thank you, Mano. That is a very good point. One, let's be clear on what we mean by vulnerability, which you said is human connection, Mary, and not necessarily exposing all of what's going on inside. And timing is important too, Mano. So for instance, if you're meeting a brand new team for the first time, you might not want to lead by saying, I'm feeling terribly inadequate and insecure right now, but bear with me. So yeah, that's a really good point. I see a lot coming in through chat, so let's take a look here. Mark Brumley loves your point, Mary. Human beings, not human doings. Love it. From at typical thinking, I don't make mistakes as a leader. I coach others through their mistakes. Wow, Dan, great insight. Okay, good. We're getting lots of confirmation here. Oh wait, we have a question from Jean. Would you agree that employees will fill in the communication gaps for themselves around the water cooler or the virtual world in which we live? What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, from my experience, and I think there's a human nature aspect of this, in the void of specific confirming information,
Mhm.
we just tend as human beings, I think, to go to worst case scenarios. And so one of the impacts, if there's available information that's not being openly and proactively shared, and you're leaving it up to the team to fill in those gaps, my experience has been it tends to have a bias towards a more negative expectation, worst case outcome than positive. And then that's a scenario where you're kind of playing catch up. So leaders, they
Yeah,
kind of, you can get it back on track, but you feel like you're kind of chasing after this kind of growing, more negative, disengaging kind of scenario. So you can prevent that to a large degree by, again, being very proactive. And then again, thinking about uh, the transparency not just being a waterfall or cascading of being informative, but actually being engaging by making that communication interactive, by asking questions, not just passing along information, but proactively reaching out to engage in real conversations, showing a respect and an interest in the actual feedback and ideas from your team. So you can turn it into an opportunity, even if it's negative information, you can turn it into a positive just through the act of that engagement and that interactive communication.
absolutely. Absolutely. So I think some real keys there are one, timing is so important. So if there's information to share it in a timely basis, because lack of information, as you said, Dan, people will make it up and they often lean towards the more negative. And the critical importance of really deep listening so you understand what's on the minds of the various folks within your organization and can address those concerns. So thank you, Jean, for the questions. Okay, so I want to talk about something we're hearing more and more about. I just read an article about this in Harvard Business Review, this concept of cognitive strain. Cognitive strain is a real thing, and it's brought on by a whole host of dynamics in today's work environment. The constant interruptions, disruptions, information overload that we talked about earlier. So one of the things to bear in mind is thinking about how, as leaders, we can help minimize that cognitive strain through our approach to communication. So, Dan, what advice do you have in this regard?
Yeah, I think we all are bombarded with more data, more information, more PowerPoint slides. Yeah, I mean, it's a really common phenomenon, and there's real burnout. And so some things to keep in mind. I mean, certainly in terms of virtual events like this or collaborative calls, I saw a recent study that said as much as 83% of participants are multitasking, we think, during these calls. So there's an attention span and an engagement issue again, even in terms of those environments. Some things that can really help that I've tried and I've seen some positive results from, and other leaders have shared, use of annotation. So by that I mean bringing in some more interactive tools. There are lots that are out there. Miro board is one that I've seen used very effectively, where you're at, instead of relying on static, crammed slides, and just kind of rolling through that, people get just, it's blurry. Getting into more, we're going to start with more of a virtual whiteboard, so to speak, and we're going to actually create and build as we go along. And so there's that heightened kind of emotional connection of the anticipation of what are we building, and we're seeing it created literally before our eyes rather than a pre-canned slide that's coming in. So the act of working together to build and create just kind of really helps create more interest, engagement, and feeling less overwhelmed. You're actually more in control, feeling more in control as part of it. And the other thing that has worked really well in any sort of group meeting, when there's a sharing of information, maybe we're doing some annotating, is stopping, doing some spot polling. So again, asking questions. It's amazing. It seems really simple, but we often just don't do it. Is stop and ask the group a question to ponder. Maybe use small group breakouts, allow for some digestion and some interaction. and some collaboration build, not just staying static in the large group setting. So really trying these variety of approaches beyond just the typical, I'm here to present 40 slides to you today, and you're going to listen and take notes.
Great, great. Lots of really practical takeaways in that, Dan. So it's not just about the how and what you're communicating, it's how you design that experience and take advantage of the tools at your disposal to make sure that you're making it very, very engaging and interactive. Mary, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I also think when you're designing communications or a meeting presentation, thinking about content versus connection, which is what are people needing in the moment? If folks are coming into a room emotionally flooded and you dive right into the content, you're going to lose them. And so reading the room, whether it's the Zoom room or the physical room, of like, what's the body language? Are people on camera? What's happening in the world, and taking that into consideration about your approach so that you don't miss people or leave them behind. I also think it's helpful to give people a roadmap, especially if you have an extended period of time together, of like, how long do they have to be on for, and when do they maybe get those little breaks, so they give their brains a rest, their bodies a rest, so that they can then effectively re-engage in the conversation.
Excellent. Wonderful. I think it's time for some stories. So we know effective communication is imperative. I think that's well established. I'd love to hear from each of you an example of a story in which you observed a leader using communication artfully to manage a particular situation, or not so artfully, to give us examples of things not to do. Dan, why don't you kick us off?
Oh, the stories, but we all have moments that stay with us through our career, and one that I will draw from that I think is a great example of a particular approach. We all have probably been involved with major product launches, and a year, 2 years of preparation and build up, high level of cross-functional collaboration, getting ready to launch our proud and powerful and compelling product. It's a big moment, high visibility. And this story goes back about 12 years, getting ready for one of these major product launches. The subject matter expert in our virtual launch event, very dynamic product manager, was going to really just be this beacon of excitement and building around this product, was located across the country in Atlanta, the rest of the team in Seattle. And what happens? Storm of the century comes and hits, ice storm, snowstorm, that basically tanks a lot of the network connectivity. And so at this moment of going live, and we know we have competitors on because they want to check out what all of this exciting news is. We have key customers, we have analysts, we are exposed. And in that moment, no product manager. Delayed, we're scrambling behind the scenes, trying to come up with contingency on that. A sense of disappointment, a sense of embarrassment around that. And so you could just feel the level just deflating, the level of enthusiasm turning from anticipation into fear in terms of what's going to happen when we get through this. Is this going to be a moment of accountability? Is this going to be a moment of blame? Who's at fault? This fell short. And something magical happened in that moment. So we figured it out. We had some substitutes. We were ready to come in to kind of get through. Ultimately, we brought the product manager back in after a lengthy delay. We got through it, okay? It was not how we drew it up in the script. Now, in that moment, there was a senior VP kind of overseeing that whole product division that was witnessing everything that was happening, okay? And he was actually part of that whole scramble and trying to go to plan B. Now, in that moment, when we got off that launch event, he had a choice to make. He could bring the team in and immediately get into, let's roll up the sleeves and we're going to start dissecting this because this really fell short. What went wrong? Okay. And then how are we going to fix what went wrong? Or he could think about human connection. He could bring emotional intelligence and situational awareness into that situation to say, I've got to play the long game, right? We've got a team here. I've got to keep them emotionally healthy. I've got to keep them engaged because we've got work to do. Yes, this is a launch event, but we've got a product to go and sell. We have a product to go and support. And what he chose to do in that moment was to gather the team in a lounge area, informal area, come in with a smile on his face and basically kind of chuckling and saying, yep, we had our own perfect storm, didn't we? And it just kind of lifted. You could just feel that burden of, oh, we're going to just get nailed on this. You know, it just lifted and changed the whole mindset of that team. And he basically expressed his pride and how impressed he was that the team kept it together and was able to kind of persevere through that. And yes, there'll be a retrospective in terms of we could strengthen our contingency plans, you know, worst case scenario planning. So maybe we could be more proficient at being able to just smoothly kind of transition from original plan to alternate plan. But in the moment, he showed great emotional intelligence in terms of keeping the team healthy, keeping the team focused on the learning that we are going to take and how that's going to only make us better and stronger going forward.
Great, wonderful example. Thank you for sharing. And I really appreciated when you said in that moment he had a choice to make. As leaders, we have choices to make all the time. And it takes that experience and that practice, that investment in our own development to increase the likelihood that we're going to choose right in those unexpected moments. Mono, what about from you?
In my case, it's actually, in my case, it's an example of a tech leader of tech leaders where I've seen things done well, and I'll talk later about done poorly, but certainly tech leaders who have to deliver difficult news, or leaders who have to have deliver difficult news, need to not have a dissonance between their persona and the way the message they're presenting and their personal presentation. The bad example I've seen is one of a tech leader announcing major job losses with a huge grin on his face. Now that doesn't quite work. So there needs to be emotional intelligence, which most leaders should possess, of not doing that. But we constantly see this sort of situation with people who should, frankly, know better.
Yeah. Definitely an example of something we want to avoid, and the importance of that congruence between your body language and what you're actually saying needs to be aligned. Mary, how about one from you?
Yeah, I have a story that's more of proactive communication and really thinking about what was the culture we wanted to create to get to some specific outcomes. So in the frame of working at Stanford at the Graduate School of Business, we run a public speaking program called the Low Keynotes program. And it's similar to a TED program where students are delivering a 9-minute talk on some idea that's going to change lives, organizations, or the world. And it is a big deal to get into this program, and it's a big lift. So once they are in, they have 8 weeks to execute from an idea to a stunning delivery on a stage that will be recorded for YouTube. And so my team and I needed to really think about how do we create an inspiring vision that we can get everyone to say yes to, that we can therefore then design the alliance of how we're going to work together. So we focused on what was the impact that we hoped this collective group of students would have on the world through these talks. And then moved on to, so what does that mean for how do we work with each other? Meaning, this is like individual runners on a race course, but we are also a team giving each other feedback, cheering each other on, wanting to create space to take risk and to have that creative tension and give and take between the coaches and the students to get to a final product that would really move our audiences, to think in different ways about these new ideas. And so ultimately, because we built such a tight container with each other and setting expectations and holding this bigger vision of culture, we had really magical performances by the students. I think they were so proud and satisfied of the work they did. I think these videos that are now floating out in the world are meaningful and are giving people pause and a moment to think about things in a new way. And I think for those of us working in the program, it was a really enjoyable experience, right? Because there was no struggle in what our roles were or how we were going to get there. And so there was just buy-in from the beginning so we could have a really creative, collaborative, and fun process together.
Oh gosh, wonderful example. And as someone who was privileged to once serve on a panel of coaches for the dry runs of these presentations, I can attest to the fact that it is truly magical and profound to see this young talent speaking about ideas to literally change the world. I mean, it is really awe-inspiring. In fact, Mary, while we move on to the next question, if you could, Amy Ferber, thank you. She put the actual name of them, low keynotes. Copy and paste that if you're in the audience and check out some of those speeches on YouTube. Yeah. They're worth the investment in time. And congratulations on your leadership in creating something truly magical and inspiring. Okay, before we leave with some parting advice, thank you, Amy Ferber. The link is in chat for you. Our producer's slacking, so we, needed that extra assistance. Just kidding you, Brian. At the outset, I promised to come back to something. Mono, could you briefly talk a little bit about what advice you have to offer in instances in which you're leading a globally diverse team, and how you go about adjusting your communication style and approach depending on the needs and preferences of the different cultures that you're working with, especially if you're doing something like a global town hall, when you have to communicate and connect with such diversity in such a big setting.
Yeah, so I had the privilege of working in many such organizations, and the last one with 120 plus countries, and where it was important to understand that and we'll come to communication channels later, but the global town hall was one that had to be done to present the face of new strategies and objectives for the company. But it was a very difficult challenge to present the messages in terms that were relevant to, say, people working in the US and Europe, and to people working in other cultures. There was also overlaid on that the fact that language differences may make some people appear introverted, whereas the extroverts take over the room. And there, I think it's important, in addition to the global channel, to verbal presentations and town halls, to also use the more modern, well-established now channels of social media within the organization, your workplace, those sort of tools, where you can use surveys and for it's not used as much now, but word clouds, to allow those people who appear introverted because of their different cultural backgrounds or language difficulties or challenges to have their voice heard as well. So certainly do things like that, and make sure that when you present, you try and see the world through the eyes of the people that you're speaking to. And in some of these organizations, you're likely never to meet many people. I happen to have been brought up in Kenya, but I knew to my sorrow that I would never speak to the people in Kenya. I would never visit there because of because of the way the organization was structured. So I think it's a case of trying to navigate through communications with people you see every day and people who you'll never see in such a large organization, and trying to titrate or adjust your language so that you can communicate at levels that mean something to each of those people.
Yes. Yes. And I liked, we always talk about the importance of being audience centric, and being effective in the moment requires a lot of upfront work, which you were talking about. So making sure that you're really getting a pulse from your different groups in different parts of the world. So you're proactively addressing and bringing that into that broader global event.
Yeah, and to actively encourage engagement through those social media channels within the organization, so that you let those people have a direct line to you.
For sure. Absolutely. Okay. So, wow. I hope you're not feeling, after all this conversation, this is a pretty tall order. I need to be inspiring. I need to be authentic. I need to be vulnerable at times. I need to be transparent. I need to know how to adjust my style and approach depending on my audience. The good news is none of us should expect to do it alone. I liked the point you made, Mary, about the collaboration and the support of one another. So let's leave with each of you sharing some of your favorite resources, tools, any resources or advice that you want to share that can help leaders in this process. Let's lead off with you, Mary.
Yeah, so I want to be so encouraging to everyone of it's small pieces, it's small practices done over and over again that can help enhance your communication skills and your connecting skills. So I want to echo what Carrie said of please don't feel overwhelmed. And a couple of tips I'll highlight. So, I mentioned earlier this idea of human being versus human doing. So where are you creating space in your daily practice for the being part? Finding some kind of mindfulness practice, whether that's a meditation app, going for a walk, some kind of breathing practice, maybe one of those squeezy balls on your desk, but something that just invites you to pause. Number 2, I encourage you to do some type of values assessment or taking stock of what do I want to center in my leadership? What do I want to have come across when I'm communicating? And you can do that on your own or do that with a coach. And number 3 is just practice, finding places, low stakes places to practice being in that discomfort, right? Because we all have nerves or different things that show up for us when we feel like we're on the spot and we need to be perfect, which I hope we have now accurately dispelled for all of you. There's no need to be perfect anymore. What people really want is that realness. So where can you go practice being a little more real, a little more vulnerable, a little more authentic, and doing that in some lower stakes places where you can get that feedback so that you can then practice and kind of expand your circle of comfort of where you do feel more comfortable showing up in that way. And finally, keep learning. So I like to listen to podcasts, read books and articles, and I'll highlight a few things here at the GSB. We have a really fabulous Think Fast, Talk Smart podcast led by Matt Abrahams that has really nice bite-sized chunks and different topics and different speakers. He also has a great book. I also think PowerSpeaking has wonderful resources. So I want to lift up their website and encourage folks to visit that and just look for inspiration. But again, it can be small, repetitive actions over an extended period of time that can really make a difference for you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Mary. And we have a link to Matt Abrams' book and podcast. Check it out. I highly recommend it as well. All right. How about you, Dan?
Yeah, just echoing a little bit of what Mary said about mind and body, bringing positive energy into how you engage and communicate with your teams. We know the science of endorphins. And so I recommend in whatever works for you, create and protect that space on your calendar for some sort of physical activity that kind of gets the endorphins going. And you'll be amazed if you do that at the beginning of the day, how that just gives you more energy to just engage in a positive way throughout the day. And then from a podcast, from a book and learning perspective, what I would really recommend is challenge your senses. So there are so many formats that are available now to consume information. Don't just get locked into, I know some people love to have physical printed books, and there's a place for that, but mix it up, because you'll see if you take the audiobook route, sometimes when you're just consuming information through your ears, that there's a different experience, right? And how you internalize it. So really be diverse in terms of how you consume that information. And there's so much short form available video information where you can see others that are presenting, others that are communicating, learn from how they are doing it. And then lastly, what I would say is don't overlook the value of engaging your family and your personal network, even outside of your work organization, to give you feedback. I've had amazing experiences just with my spouse, just getting an objective perspective in terms of how I was going to approach a communication situation. You'll be amazed, even though they're outside the organization, sometimes that gives you a really unbiased filter and allow you to do that. So lots of additional best practice stories are available out on Market Impact Insights, the podcast, and of course in the Impact Makers book.
Terrific. Lots there, Dan. Thank you. Thank you. Mono, bring us home.
Everything that Mary and Dan said, and for me, the absolute critical thing is your personal values. So you can use, if your leaders and managers, your family is a safe place, your immediate team can be a safe place, and regular and often meetings with those people, repeated meetings with those people, to the point where this behavior becomes part of your natural behavior, where it becomes part of your personal values, and then you're there, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And give yourself grace and the freedom to take some risk. We talked about it's not about perfection, it's about connection. I want to thank you so very much. You have offered exceptional advice. This fortunately is available in podcast form because there is a lot here that we covered. Also, thank you, audience. Your engagement and your input was just outstanding. We're going to close by promoting next month's live event, which is Next Level Technical Speaking. And I encourage you, before you drop, if you could please put in chat any topics that you would love for us to cover in future live events. Thank you so much.